We're here today because we have filed a federal civil rights lawsuit on behalf of the family of Shayne Sullivan. Karen, his mother, and Shayne has two children, Shayne Jr., 6 years old, Demetria, 4 years old, who are now without a father. We are also here today to demand justice and accountability for these police officers who took Shayne Sutherland's life. We have filed a lawsuit against the city of Stockton, a federal civil rights lawsuit, and those individual officers and the chief of police. But ultimately, we are calling for the criminal prosecution of those officers because based on the facts, they unnecessarily took a life and used excessive force where really none was warranted. So what happened nearly a year ago, October 8th, 2020? Well, Shayne Sutherland had called for help. He was in an AM/PM. He asked for a taxi. Obviously, something's not right. The store clerk calls, and Shayne is distracting customers, maybe causing a disturbance. But when the officers arrive, Shayne leaves the store compliant with them. He puts his hands behind his head, interlaces his fingers, spreads his legs. They search him. He has no weapons. He sits on the ground and is compliant with those police officers asking questions. And then he made what turned out to be a fatal mistake in a moment of panic. He stood up, he took 2 steps, and he basically just turned into the arms of the officers. He wasn't trying to flee, he wasn't going anywhere. And they immediately took him down to the ground, and they handcuffed him without incident. He was handcuffed, laying prone on the ground, face down, in a manner when your hands are behind your back, which restricts breathing. This wasn't enough for the officers. They, after handcuffing him, began to place full body weight, and one of the officers took out his baton and pressed down on Shayne's back, his shoulders, and although we only have one body cam, the officer who takes out that baton, we don't have his body cam yet, but we'll get it in this lawsuit, is pressing down, restricting his breathing, while Shayne screams, "I can't breathe. I'm begging you. You're choking me." And his words become more and more garbled as you could see him struggling for breath. This went on for close to 3 minutes as these officers didn't get up and they didn't let up. Now, we have a problem here in Stockton with the San Joaquin coroner's office. San Joaquin coroner's office declared this an accident. This was no accident. This was a homicide. The family of Shayne Sutherland hired one of the preeminent pathologists in the state of California, Dr. Bennet Omalu, and he examined the body, and he noted contusions to Shayne's jaw, his lip, his nose, his face, his back, his thighs. When those officers were pressing Shayne into the ground, they were pushing his face into the ground, and as you saw with George Floyd, Shayne Sutherland was not resisting. Shayne Sutherland was moving his head in an attempt to gasp for breath. Dr. Omalu concluded that the cause of death was restraint asphyxiation. This is not a surprise. This has not come out just with the George Floyd, that if you have a person prone on the ground with their handcuffs behind their back, it cuts off airway to the heart and to the brain and people die. Law enforcement has known this for decades. I have been a civil rights lawyer in the state of California for over 30 years. My first positional asphyxiation case was in 1992. Yet it keeps happening, even in the face of someone literally pleading for their life. "You're choking me. Please, I beg you, calling them sir, and finally saying, "I am already dead," with an expletive in there. But Shayne told him, "I am already dead." The officer didn't let up then. The officer didn't let up until his partner said, "Oh, wait a minute, he's changing colors." And we could hear from the tape afterwards that they did not provide medical care immediately afterwards when they had the dying Shayne Sutherland, when they had the dying Shayne Sutherland down at their feet. Now, we have sent that second autopsy report to the district attorney. We have sent it to the attorney general, the Department of Justice in California. I recently got a letter from the Department of Justice that they're keeping their hands off of this. Why? Because the district attorney has this case under investigation. And we call on this district attorney's office to promptly render justice by filing criminal charges. Look, we have an epidemic of police killings in the state of California. The amount of people being killed by police actually increased after we all witnessed George Floyd being snuffed out to death for 9 minutes. In order for there to be deterrence, justice has to be swift, it has to be appropriate, it has to be fair. But we don't get justice when police officers kill someone. It's very, very rare. Why in the state of Minnesota are they able to file criminal charges within days of viewing that video? Yet in California, we have a full 1 year later when all of this is on video and no action is taken. No action is taken against these police officers. We haven't been informed that they've been disciplined in any way. The family of Shayne Sutherland, they're victims here. They have victims' rights. There are videos, security footage from that AM/PM which the police say they have. Why aren't they releasing that one publicly? Why aren't they releasing the video of the officer who had the baton, who was pressing down on Shayne's back and neck? And you could see in a brief snippet from that other officer's video that he has his forearm across Shayne Sutherland's neck as Shayne is begging for his life. So we asked the district attorney to file criminal charges. The family of Shayne Sutherland, Karen Sutherland is without a son. His brothers and sisters are without their older brother. His children, who he loved, Shayne is described as a loving, funny father who took care of his kids and loved them. He was a youth football coach. He was 29 years old when his life was taken. 29. Those kids will grow up without a father. And Karen Sutherland is here to speak to you about that loss. And in conclusion, while I think ultimate justice can only be gotten in criminal courts, punishment needs to be swift to deter. We are civil rights prosecutors. We will prosecute this case in civil court, and if the city of Stockton won't do their job, and if the district attorney won't do their job, we will do our job and get justice for this family. Thank you very much. Karen Sutherland.
I've spoke out many times in this last year for my son, along with my family and friends. I can't begin to tell you the absolute devastating loss that I, as a mother, feel every single day. It's a constant nightmare I wake up to every single day. And it was not justified. My son was of no threat. Okay? He was complying. There was no reason for those officers to do what they did, especially with my son begging and telling them I can't breathe. My family's loss, my grandchildren's loss. We spent Christmas at the cemetery last year and opened gifts out there. My grandchildren loved their father. My son was a good father. He loved his children. He loved his stepchildren. Everybody has suffered a huge loss. I mean, there's no words to even describe it. Watching my grandchildren at the cemetery, talking to their dad at his headstone, telling them that they love him as they're walking away. I want to mention that the first phone call that I got on October 8th to tell me that my son had died, Stockton Police Department lied to me and to Erica and told us that Shayne stood up and collapsed to the ground and stopped breathing. I asked them several times, did you tackle them? Did you tackle him? Did you tase him? Did you shoot him? How did he just collapse to the ground? I don't know, ma'am. He just collapsed to the ground and he stopped breathing. That's the first start of their deception to my family. And now withholding the video, the unedited video, I still have not gotten the store surveillance. They're withholding all of this from my family. And we're asking that they be held accountable. Ronald Zalunardo and John Afanasiev, the Stockton police officers that murdered my son by asphyxiation, they need to be fired from Stockton Police Department and never be allowed to work as a police officer again. And they also need to be charged with my son's murder. And Chief Eric Jones needs to be held accountable as well for allowing this to happen and not disciplining his officers. We want justice for my son.
Thank you, Karen.
What do we want?
Justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
If anybody has any questions, we'll take them.
Have you spoken to the district attorney's office on where their investigation stands at this point?
We have not. We sent them a letter in early September with the description of why we contend that criminal charges should be filed. We attached to that letter the second autopsy of Dr. Omalu, which clearly establishes that this is a homicide, because we don't believe that they had access to that. We wanted to make sure they had all the information. We did not receive any contact from the district attorney's office since we sent them that letter. They haven't contacted us yet.
What do you say to people who see the video and see that Shayne was sitting down and then suddenly took off or tried to run? Those people that say he wasn't complying at that point.
Well, yes, it's true that momentarily Shayne stood up, but he didn't take off. He ran into the arms of the police officers. And as soon as he ran into the arms of the police officers, he immediately knew he made a mistake. He said, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. They told him, they put him down on the ground, they're handcuffing him. He said, don't move. He says, I'm not moving. They tell him to relax. He says, I'm relaxing. So, you know, what type of society do we want to live in? We want to live in a society where someone makes the decision momentarily to run from the police, and that results in a death sentence? That's a miscarriage of justice. If Shayne Sutherland committed a crime, you bring him in and you bring him to court. There is an established protocol once he is handcuffed and once he is on the ground, you put him on his side. It's absolutely mandatory to put him on his side. You have two officers. He's handcuffed. You hold him on one end of his body and the other. He poses no threat. He's not going to be able to do anything to you as a police officer with handcuffs. So what I say to them is, would they want to be judged in their worst mistake of their life? And two, the way this related Shayne was no threat to the officers, and it shouldn't have resulted in them killing him. There was no reason to put that amount of force and pressure on his neck, back, and shoulder when he's face down, when they know they've been trained that that can result in someone's death. It's an unnecessary risk.
Karen, has a police chief or anyone from the department ever reached out to you and spoken to you?
No. Chief Eric Jones has never reached out to me. The only person that I've talked to is the homicide detective. And then when I was first notified of Shayne's death, there was another detective that called me.
And this is a recurrent problem both in law enforcement and with the city of Stockton. I mean, looking at the city of Stockton's history with their police department, it's clear that they have lied to families in terms of how the cause of death came. Now, they tried to spin it in a way with having the one video, but it does tell the tale of what happened here. And it really is. I mean, there should be a law that families whose loved ones are killed by law enforcement, that they are contacted by law enforcement and they're told the truth, and let the justice system take its course like it does in every other situation where someone's life is taken.
Karen, if you had the opportunity right now to speak to Police Chief Jones, what would you tell him?
I would ask him why. I mean, why does he allow this to happen? And why hasn't he disciplined his officers? Why hasn't he fired them? They killed my son. My son was begging for his life and calling out for me. That shouldn't have happened. That shouldn't have happened, and they should have been fired immediately.
The state legislature and the governor just signed a new use of force law. Obviously, doesn't impact your case directly, but can you speak to that and how this would have applied?
Well, there's been a number of different laws signed recently by our governor, and we thank both the legislature and the governor for taking some action. I think two of the laws that he signed really have an impact here. One is that we don't know these officers' history, but what's come out in other cases of police misconduct with the Stockton Police Department is that those officers who have even killed people have had a past where they've engaged in excessive force. So that law could have come into effect if these officers are repeat offenders. The new law allows those officers to be a process by which those officers can be decertified and not remain members of the force. So that could have resulted in the saving of Shayne Sutherland's life. But the other bill that is signed that I think would affect this is that it restricts police officers from using asphyxiation techniques in order to subdue someone. I mean, this has been something that's been well known. When you have someone handcuffed, you cannot apply pressure to their neck. They're struggling breathing anyway, and there's just no reason to do it. And in terms of even when they're not handcuffed, that carotid restraint completely cuts off air through the airways and can kill someone. So it's just like shooting a bullet in their chest. You're choking someone like that, you're going to kill them. You shouldn't do it unless that officer is in a life-threatening situation. I mean, we're not trying to take away all power from the police. I mean, I think we do need police officers, but we need police officers who are responsible and who revere life and not so callously take it as was done here for Shayne Sutherland. Yes?
With the resigning of Chief Jones, if any, will that have an impact on a civil case?
It shouldn't have an impact. He can still be held liable if we can tie in his decisions in terms of failure to discipline officers and setting a policy and practice of excessive force within the police department. Police chiefs can be held liable if they maintain a practice of not disciplining officers when they engage in excessive force, and the evidence appears to be there, and we were going to pursue that in discovery in this case. Yes, we are. We're looking for compensation for the family of Shayne Sutherland in our federal civil rights lawsuit.
And what is that amount?
We haven't asked for a specific amount. I'm a trial lawyer, and basically the juries get jury instructions, and juries are asked to use their common sense and to provide fair compensation for the loss of love and companionship. And we would think that amount, when you're dealing with a 29-year-old who had a full life ahead of him with his children, that amount will be very large. But we believe in the jury system. We'll leave that up to a jury when the time is right.
Is there any? No, I would like my son back. Money's not going to fix that. Money's not going to bring my son back. But he does have two small children that he is no longer here. He was a hard worker. He provided for his family. And now he's no longer here to do that.
That's it.
What was he working at that time?
He was a journeyman for the Glazers and Glass Workers Union, Local 169. How much time do I have? You know, considering how, and just looking at my son's case and how they treated my son from the beginning, you know, my son was very polite. My son was a polite person in general. Opened doors for people. I mean, that was my son. He was just very polite. And he was being polite to them, and he was calling them sir. I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry. Just like Jim said, he was, you know, he came out with his hands up. He was complying. He sat down when they told him to sit down. Okay? And they immediately just started belittling him. They have like a attitude, anger issues. They, you know, they need to screen their police officers better. They need to have compassion. I don't feel training helps somebody with that. They need to have compassion. That's what I would like to see changed.
For those who didn't know Shayne, how would you describe him?
Describe Shayne? Everybody loved Shayne. Everybody loved Shayne. He was funny, personal. Like, I mean, you could talk to him about anything. Very smart. If he wanted to know something, he was on his phone looking it up. He would come in, hey mama, look at this. You know? Everybody says that about him. He's very, very missed. There was over 200 people at his funeral in a pandemic.
How do you want the community to remember him?
I just want people to remember him, that he was a good person, very genuine, very loving, very hard worker, and he was a great father and a great son.
What happens next? What's the next step?
Well, we're in federal court. So in federal court, each side has the obligation to disclose the evidence that they're going to use in the lawsuit. What we will do is we will prepare a request for production documents, which include all requests for past records of these officers, as well as all of the video in this case. But quite frankly, there's a little bit of time that takes once you file a lawsuit to get that information, and it may not come as any surprise. Usually cities don't necessarily just turn all over that at the first time we ask. So we'll do what's necessary to prosecute this case through the federal civil rights. The case is filed in Sacramento. The trial would be in Sacramento. After we get that information, we'll take depositions of the involved police officers, the chief of police. Our clients will be deposed, most likely, and then we'll see. We'll be prepared to take this to trial to get justice. All right. Well, we thank everybody for coming out and for your interest in this case. It really is a tragedy that could have been averted if just by some common sense of the police officers that day, instead of resorting to that type of force. And we're hoping that this case does send a message to police forces across the country that it doesn't take 9 minutes, as in the situation with George Floyd. This was about 2.5 minutes, but you could take someone's life by pressing on their neck in a much shorter period of time. And in terms of the changes in the Stockton police force, I understand training doesn't solve anything, but this has to be reiterated among police forces, the power they have in their hands to take a life when someone is handcuffed on the ground, proned out. There's too many people dying that way, and they have to be trained not to do it. You put the person on the side. It's common sense. It saves lives. If officers aren't doing it, they shouldn't be on the force. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.